Hello, this is Barbara Field. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and welcome to my channel, The Journey of Grief, Becoming Us Without Them. Today, we are so lucky to have three panelists who are all hypnotherapists, and they're going to talk to us today about their work and, in particular, working with people in grief. And I think we're going to learn a lot of amazing stuff. So let's get started. Jeanene, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thank you so much, Barbara. I am Jeanene Introduces. I am a certified clinical hypnotherapist. Um, I love helping people with all kinds of grief. I've helped mostly women going through fertility journeys, which is also just different layers of grief in there, not just death grief. But I think my own real experience that brought me to this is I have always fostered and taken in senior dogs. So sometimes I have them for a year or two, and sometimes I only have them for a couple days. I've done this for years. I also worked at an animal hospital at the time, so I saw um, the the impact of that process, going through that own process. Um, myself and how I've learned to embrace it, but also watching other people and the different layers of that. It's very near and dear to my heart. So I love to help people process those emotions in a healthy way.
That's awesome. Laura, would you like to introduce us to you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Laura Edwards. I'm a certified clinical hypnotherapist at Sacramento Hypnotherapy. I love helping people with whatever layers of grief or pain in their lives that they're going through. I myself have experienced many different types of grief with loss of parents, um, loss of loved ones who are still alive, but relationships have ended. That's when I learned, wow, grief has so many different faces and so many different experiences for us. And I was my mother's caregiver during her cancer journey. And basically, per Rumi's quote, I walked her home. And I knew I wanted to help other people with that kind of experience and processing and grief that comes from that. And yeah, so I'm here to help.
That's great. Thank you so much for agreeing to be with us today. And
Thank you.
Maude, how about you?
Hi, I'm Maude Schellhous. I am a certified clinical hypnotherapist, also at Sacramento Hypnotherapy. And in my 20s, I lost my grandma and my uncle within a very, very short period of time. And, I think that so many people can relate when you say, like, those were the closest people to me, like, those were my people. Um, and I just had kind of a crash course in grief at that time. And then shortly after that, had the great honor to do hypnotherapy for a few people as they were going through the dying process. And going to someone's home and sitting with them, doing hypnotherapy for them, which is not something that often people think of hypnotherapy for, was so incredibly profound. And it also taught me so much about the grief of their loved ones. And I was able to work with them following their loved one's death. And it's been a subject that's been really dear to my heart ever since. It's something that I love helping with. And as I know everyone on this panel would agree, it's something that if you feel that you can do, you should do. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks. That's great. So you all have prepared some topics that you would like to share with us. So you're welcome to chime in. Sometimes Zoom knocks you out if you're trying to talk at the same time, but this will not do that as badly, so you can talk a little more in a more flowing way. So Jeanene, what would you like us to learn today?
So I feel like I've helped people a lot with all of the different aspects of grief. I think sometimes society lets us believe that there is just one way, and there is just one level of grief. Maybe we should get over it, those types of things, and not really embracing all of it. There's so many different aspects of grief. There's the actual death. It's either someone no longer here, a relationship, maybe someone has actually died. Kind of Laura talked about the relationships that end maybe within like a family unit, those types of things. But there's a lot of self grief. And generally, I feel like people don't talk about that because it feels selfish to say, they're grieving themselves, the life that they could have had, maybe they anticipated on having with that person, how they envisioned it. After that moment, that all changes. And I feel like a lot of people experience self grief so deeply, but have no way to really articulate it really to anybody. I don't think they want to own that feeling to themselves, let alone say it out loud, because there are so many expectations of grief. But you know, there's sadness, there's anger, and sometimes there's even relief. If it's a relationship with somebody, not all of those relationships are incredibly healthy, and maybe people don't have a way out of those relationships. Something changes and suddenly there's a death. So to also share that there is a sense of relief, for some freedom and, you know, that type of thing. I've helped a couple women with that one. It was hard for them to find a place to share that. And there's a gentle way of helping people be okay with those feelings, processing those okay. And really the expectations of grief, right? What society puts on us, what the people around us put on us, and then we end up putting those on ourselves. One of the things that really gave me just a big light bulb moment was when I did work at an animal hospital, and it was kind of the beginning of COVID. So a lot of people were very isolated. Um, it was a big hospital that we worked at, in a very established neighborhood. So there were some older folks that lived there. And we did see pets come in that needed to cross over, you know, it was kind of their time. And watching people do that on a very lonely level. They didn't have their community. They didn't maybe have other friends or their family that said quickly, we'll buy you another kitten or a puppy. You know, it's not the same. It doesn't fix that. But one day I was working, I answered the phone and a woman called. It was caller ID. She was not a patient of the clinic. I don't know who she is. I think about her all the time, but her initial words were, I can't do this anymore. And so I said, oh, what can't you do? And she said, I can't get over it. I keep waiting for that day to arrive. So I asked just a couple more questions, just get a little bit more of the story. And basically, she had to say goodbye to her dog about 2 months prior. And all of her friends continually told her to get over it, go get another dog, you know. And she woke up every day hoping that was the day that she would be over it. And because she couldn't wake up that day and be over it, she didn't want to live anymore. And it just put everything into perspective for me. I feel like I've had a lot of really beautiful conversations with people, um, near crossing, during crossing, over all kinds of things. But that was a new one for me, to listen to someone living off the expectations of other people. And I think we do say things easily, like, oh, just get over it, because we don't know what to say. So I had a really honest conversation with her that day would never arrive. There is no getting over it. To think that someone was so important to you, a pet, a person, a moment, that you would suddenly just turn off all of those feelings and go on with your life as if it had never happened. So we had a very real conversation about that, and helped her understand that maybe the people around her just didn't know what to say. And so they were saying this, but in all honesty, it was about learning how to live life after that moment, right? There's no getting over it. There's no pretending it didn't happen. Those expectations, as small as that wording may be to somebody, it's monumental to be on the receiving end of that. I think many times we do have beautiful people in our lives, but sometimes pets are the only opportunity to experience true unconditional love. So it put into perspective that relationship and what that grief really does to people. And I think sometimes we expect people to be consumed with grief when it comes to people, but not to a pet. And it sounds so like simple to say grief is universal, but why is it only just people? If we experienced love and then all of a sudden that relationship has altered, whether they're here or not. I just think that's important to really help people understand those emotions and that part of grief. I think obviously I'm not afraid to talk about grief and all of those things, and truly listen to people, even if they can't articulate that all. Like I feel like I can understand that part of it for people and help soften that and help them understand that those are true, valid feelings and validate those for people. Yeah.
Cool. So Laura, um, reactions to what Jeanene put out there for us?
Oh, I absolutely agree with everything that she said. I think grief is it's an interesting animal, and it presents itself in all kinds of interesting ways with our emotions. And, it's not something you can stuff down, because grief needs to process through you. And would you like me to take this time to segue to my topic on that?
Let's give everybody a chance to talk about
Got it.
Jeanene. And so Maude, how about, what's your reaction to what Jeanene started us out with?
When I hear this story, I think what a miracle it was that this woman, out of the blue, who didn't know anyone at that veterinary office, called and got Jeanene. How did that even happen? And not only that, but I mean, we have no idea what that changed for her, but we know it was a good thing, right? And I just love thinking about what that spark created in Jeanene to go on to help so many people with grief. And I'm really glad that we're talking about grief, not just for people, but also grief of the loss of a relationship and grief with the loss of a pet. I mean, we have grief when we lose a job sometimes. Like, it's just so much further reaching. And I don't think that there is often a lot of space given for different kinds of grief. for some reason, certain kinds of grief are given more importance in our lives than others. So I'm
So
really
Jeanene, I loved your idea of self-grief. I think that's so important, and I'm not sure people understand that. Working with addicts, that's a huge part
Mm.
of it. They'll have a big grow, but then they grieve because they remember the loss of time and money and people and opportunity. But all of this, even when you go to a great thing, like you leave college and you go to your first awesome job, you have left a part of your life. Your friends, your car knows how to drive where it needs to go and sometimes takes itself anyway. And you've lost a version of yourself, so no beautiful new thing is born without something else being lost. And so even the most awesome thing can cause a little funeral inside here unless we have someone that can help us know that it's okay to be sad that those things are going away, even when something wonderful is happening. I think a lot of people are just full of those hateful conversations where they tell themselves, get over it, when you really, it would be great if you could just talk to somebody about holding two opposite things as true. I'm sad that that's gone. Well, I'm very excited that this is here. And I think self-grief is a huge concept that
Mm.
we really don't talk about much at all. All right, so Laura, what would you like us to think about today?
Well, it just kind of, segueing from Jeanene's topic about grief having an expiration date. And we've talked about this, the three of us, extensively about that there truly is no expiration date to grief. You're changed forever by it. The enormity of it, and it that won't always stay enormous. It will adapt and change as you move through it, and hopefully that's with support. But I think what happens is that people want there to be an expiration date because of the enormity and the overwhelming, and it's we as a society have never really learned how to deal with such big, heavy, messy emotions. It's almost like we want to tuck it away. And I think that's what happens with folks, is that they feel like they need to hide away while they grieve because they don't want to disturb the world with this sadness and this pain and this suffering. And yet we as humanity, we need to be witnessed and seen and held during our grief. I found this really great quote. It says, "The heaviness of grief is a burden we were never meant to carry on our own." And I just think that's so telling, that we need to have those grief support groups. In fact, that's where you can find those like-minded people who are in the same kind of position you are. So there's community there. And certainly with counseling and therapy, all of those things can help that enormity get to a place where it feels, containable and not overwhelming. So I think, just to say that there'll never really be an expiration date. We're changed forever by grief, but it doesn't mean that we don't get to have, our life in front of us. It's grief for the life that was lived, and it's grief for the life that was lost. And that's some really big emotions that definitely need support, that needs help, that needs, like I said, witnessing. Um, that's part of our humanity. Rather than tucking away, hiding away, I think we can process through it better when we have the help that we need to do that. And I think that as the grieving, we also need to find the words to be able to tell our loved ones what we need. Often we hear those words of, well, let me know what I can do for you. The grieving's never going to know, and never going to say. I can say that personally. It's like, no, no, just show up for the meal, show up for the coffee. Tell me you're going to pick up my kids after school and take them to the park and give them a day of normal, you know? So I think it's for us also to be able to speak to it. And I can remember clearly after one of my parents passed, and I was telling the story to a friend, and of course I got emotional. And then I found another time I was really solid, but the person I was telling was crying. And I'm like, wow, look at me. So I think, you know, grief kind of comes in and out, and we want to share our stories. We don't want to be avoided. And I think that can happen because of the enormity that grief can be in people's lives.
Great. That's absolutely true. So, Maude, what are your thoughts about this end date for grief?
I definitely agree that there isn't one of those. Um, and I've been reading and hearing lately that a lot of people in grief support are stepping away from those steps of grief, right? Like where that model for so long has been that these are the steps of grief, and this is sometimes the order in which they go in. And I found that to be really refreshing because I think that we don't ever really know. I mean, everyone's different. Everybody grieves differently. And I also think that even by putting a really strict perimeter around these are the steps and these are the order that they go in, can also cause someone who's in grief to think, I should be over this part. Now I should be over this part. Or I should be 3 steps down the road and I'm still here. And really when we're in grief, how do we know what's going to come, right? It just comes, shows up in waves, and however it shows up is however it shows up. So how in the world would we have that just be tied up in a neat little bow and thought to be um, supposed to be in a linear fashion somehow?
Absolutely. I think people are agreeing that if you look at the stages of grief, we all do those pieces and parts, but there's certainly no order. And it's not like you go through it once and then you get a certificate of graduation. You, unfortunately, like you said, the waves, you keep going back through those stages over and over. Yeah. So, Jeanene.
Beautifully said, ladies. Yeah, I do wish the new messaging in the world was this unrealistic, unattainable, written down timeline of how you go through it. You know, I've seen people be hyper vigilant and they're not going to show signs of grief, but obviously their hyper vigilance is that I am fine. I am so strong. You know, I mean, um, I, 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 I think one of my biggest just, I don't know, frustrations, makes me mad, that we have as a society, we have created this timeline for people, and it makes grief harder than it already is by telling people how to do it or how to get over it or to be messy, but don't be too messy, you know? And we're just not allowing people to truly go through all the emotions or one or two of them. I mean, whatever, you know, it's so individual for everybody. One of the things that I love that Laura said, because it's true, we don't know what to say. I feel like I have gotten better about my own words, but generally when we're uncomfortable, we don't know what to say to somebody. So we say the weird things like, well, they're in a better place. You know, when you get over it, you know, those kinds of things where we have no idea how that other person is, you know, taking that in. I feel like I have gotten better about my own words, just learning about it. But I think in those moments that we're kind of frozen in that grief and we don't know how to tell somebody, oh, could you bring me the dinner or pick up my kids, like Laura said. But I it's one of the things that I personally love helping people with is finding some balance, especially at the beginning stages of grief. We don't expect you to like couple sessions and be done and over. That's not the point, but holding that space for them to settle. It's almost just like regulate for a moment, get your feet on the ground, and learning that asking for the dinner or to pick up my kids is okay, and helping them find that voice to ask for that. Like I do wish that was, worldwide. I wish we all welcomed those conversations. And I don't know if that will ever be a time and a place, just because it is such an uncomfortable conversation with people.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I remember that that is a huge one for me, Laura, because when my husband died, I didn't even quite know everything I didn't know. I couldn't remember the millions of things that he did that now I would have to do, or the things that he knew that I would have to learn on YouTube. And so it's such a mess. And when someone says at the beginning, just let me know if I can do something for you, it's very kind, but I can barely do anything, much less make a list. And so for people who just did stuff, showed up with stuff, and that, being creative in saying, all right, what are the parts of this person's life that they might not be able to handle right now? How can I just step in with a small gesture? I don't have to mow their lawn for the rest of my life, but I can mow it once. Or, when my mom died, I noticed this fell through the cracks. So I just came to fill that crack for you. Just stuff like that. And then I think that one of the most things, we do a disservice to people by leaving them with the idea that you're going to get over it.
Mhm.
So somehow people will like park the rest of themselves. Like, as soon as I'm over it, then I'm gonna. As soon as I'm over it, I'm gonna. Well, in the meantime, you don't fight your way to joy because you're waiting till you're over the pain. You don't launch and do new things because you're waiting for it to feel good. You don't take the kind of risks you're going to have to take now that they're gone because you're thinking, well, okay, as soon as the pain stops, I'll go do that.
Mhm.
But it's terrible to do that to people because the pain doesn't go away altogether. And you're going to launch things that are going to be painful because they're not there to do it with them. But that doesn't mean you can't do them. I mean, like, if I was waiting for the pain to go away to enjoy my granddaughters, I would have missed out on a ton of really cool stuff. So I just kind of incorporated the pain and the joy together. So to me, that's the biggie of people thinking they're going to be over it and then they'll be the rest of their life. That's just a terrible waste. That's another self grief.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, Maude, what would you like us to discuss?
I had planned on discussing something that we've already beautifully begun, which is that people aren't prepared for what other people will say to them when they're grieving. And when we're in grief, we are in such a vulnerable state. And I think quite often when we're in grief, we are just reaching to our loved ones and to authorities and to really anybody that we think that can help to help because it's so painful. And, or it can be so painful. And quite often when I've worked with people, they have told me that people are telling them to get over it. People are telling them to go find somebody new, even if their spouse has died, well-meaning people that love them are telling them, oh, well, go find somebody new, start dating, and they're in the throes of grief. And then oftentimes they feel like, well, maybe I should do this, but I don't feel like I can. I remember when my beloved Labrador Retriever died, I called a loved one and he told me to buck up. And he just kept telling me over and over again. It had been one day, and buck up. And I have every time a client tells me that someone told them to buck up, ooh, it just makes my hackles stand up because we are not taught to grieve well. And that's partly why I'm making sure that I'm saying these are loved ones, these are people that are well-meaning, these are people that are trying to help. And they're still oftentimes saying what ends up really being the wrong thing, even if it comes from a good place. And what can be even more painful than that, I think, is that almost everyone I've ever worked with for grief has told me that they have also lost people in their lives because they're grieving. Not even who they lost, that they are grieving. Because some people, again, because we are not taught how to grieve, how to help others that are grieving, how to even think about death, to not be afraid of death. Oftentimes people just avoid someone who is in grief.
Absolutely. So what are your strategies that you offer people to help to respond?
Well, when someone goes into the state of hypnosis, very fortunately, it is such a gentle place to be. It's nicknamed the healing state. So even by putting somebody into that gentle healing state when they're in a lot of pain, whether it be mental, emotional, or physical pain, can really make a huge difference, even just by doing that. And then when I'm working with someone in the hypnotic state, there's a lot that can be done for soothing, for understanding, for self-soothing. We have so much more capacity to heal ourselves and treat ourselves wonderfully and just really nurture ourselves when we need it the most that we are not always aware of especially when we're in our waking, everything's going on all the time state. And there's also a technique that I really, really love called the silent communication technique. And I know we've talked about me sharing that a bit later. But that technique is really wonderful for finding a way within to communicate with others in our lives. It helps people that are grieving to communicate with their loved one who's passed or their a relationship that has ended, to communicate with a pet who's on the other side. And it also goes miles and miles and miles towards helping people communicate with those who mean well but are saying the wrong things or are avoiding altogether.
Great. So Jeanene, Maude started at a deeper level of talking about the really hard things people say to you when you're grieving and maybe some ideas for helping people respond more effectively or not respond at all.
Yeah, I feel like almost and again, I feel like I'm putting a timeline on it. Initially, I think in that brand new grief kind of it's like what you shared, Barbara. You don't even know how to put one foot in front of the other. And so to figure out a way to communicate with the people around you or yourself or whoever is passed, I feel like I'm going to touch on that communicate part. The three of us had talked prior about the communicating. It's more of like an energetic level of doing that. It's not, we are not communicating with the deceased, just to make sure we're not saying that's what we do. But I do feel like being able to get that languaging, that emotion that comes with that. Maude said emotionally, mentally, physically. I mean, that's how we carry everything, right? Grief included. It's a way for that to get out of our body, not just our minds and our hearts, but to physically release that built up. I think it's a beautiful technique that people need. It is, it's not just the release, but it, excuse me, it is a part of that self-soothing. And I think people find all kinds of different ways to self-soothe through grief. Some aren't always very healthy, but there are incredibly healthy ways. We're just not really showing people what those are. So we should do more of that.
When after my husband died, the thing that drove me the most crazy when people said, "I'm sorry you lost your husband." So for some reason that just bugged me so much because it'd be like, I didn't lose him. I know exactly where he is. I did not lose him. And that was just a weird, quirky response that I had. But one of the most helpful things that someone said to me was this woman who had suffered such profound grief in her life. She called and said, just keep breathing. That will be enough for today. I thought, okay, I can do that. If my whole job is just keep breathing, I can do that for one whole day. And then another whole day and another whole day. So yeah. And then when you guys talk about communicating with the loved one, I like to think of it like AI. So AI just scoops up every bit of information in the universe and quickly gives it to you in this format that's more amazing than you can even imagine. Well, every single moment of the life of a person that you have lost still lives in the memory bank in your nervous system. And every single moment in your memory bank and their memory bank, it's all right there. And so we are like AI. And so when we can just relax and imagine the conversation with them, our little AI system can easily create a conversation, which obviously doesn't happen, but that is very therapeutic because your body can easily assume the kind of conversation you could have had with that person. And it's not scary and talking to dead people. We're talking to the AI system inside of our bodies. And it's very powerful and it's much kinder sometimes or much meaner sometimes, but it's all in there. And if we can just learn how to organize it into something helpful, and it's awesome. So Laura, Maude, did you?
That was just beautifully said. Thank you so much for clarifying that, Barbara and Jeanene. But I also just wanted to say quickly that I love what Barbara just said so much about how it made her feel when someone said, "I'm sorry you lost your husband," as opposed to just breathe. All you have to do is take one breath after the other each day, because I mean it's a wonderful story as it is, but because I think there's such a sparkling gem in there about helping people with grief, and that is finding out where they are first. Because when people weren't meeting you where you are, where you were, it felt terrible. You're like, I'm not looking for my husband. All I'm trying to do right now is breathe, right? To have her say that to you when you were right there meeting you exactly where you were was just what you needed.
That was a great point. Okay, Laura, more about the dopey things people say and
Yeah.
how you help
Well,
people.
I would say, the grieving is in such a vulnerable place, right? The last thing that we want them to feel is shame and guilt. Shame, again, talking about that timeline that they're not over it, and guilt for maybe having a good day. It's like, oh, they must be over it. I think it's necessary for us as humans to always check in with our grieving. How are you doing today? How are your days looking? And I think for us as therapists is to help our clients find the language so they can speak what they need. And that gift that your friend gave you with just that one foot forward, just breathe. It's like, what a gift, what a gift. And, I just think if we can support our grieving and also be more mindful as supporters of the grieving, that we don't rush just to fill in space, and make some sort of comment. It's just like, can I give you a hug today? Have you eaten today? Anything you'd like to share with me today? I think it's just allowing ourselves also as the supporter of the grieving to be vulnerable too. It's like, you know what? I'm struggling with the right thing to say. And I just want to tell you, I love you.
Oh,
And I just want to hold this space for you. And please, share whatever you want to share. If you want to just sit together, and I'd love to do that too. So I think the biggest thing is like going back to, for our grieving, not to feel shame or guilt about where they're at on their grieving path. And also, they're also giving grace to those of us who may be stumbling along our way to support them. And God bless them for being able to, show some grace back our way. Because again, it's all about humanity and holding space for each other.
well, thank you so much. So we're going to be doing a separate video on some specific techniques for people to use. But for right now, let's finish up with just kind of about a minute of, if nobody listened to anything we said in this entire video, which often happens, and you could just give people one thing, 1 minute of wisdom that you hope they hold on to that and take that away with them today, what would that be? So, Jeanene, would you like to start with that?
I would hope that people would learn to turn down the judgment when it comes to grief, judging themselves, but mostly judging other people. I think about working at the animal hospital. Some people just couldn't be present when that process was happening, and people judged. Some people are not equipped. It's harder. And so there's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of judgment if people cry too much. There's a lot of people if they don't cry enough. There's judgment for moving forward, for not moving forward. There's judgment just so around that. I wish we would, as a society, just learn to pause before we judge and tell someone what to do. I don't know, maybe it would be a kinder world.
Oh, true, that would be a kind of. How about you, Laura? What do you want people to carry out of this?
Well, I'll go back to my quote. The heaviness of grief is a burden we were never meant to carry on our own. So please go get support, whether that's with a grief support group, therapist, counseling. Get help, get support to help you with this new change in your life.
Great, thank you. And Maude, how about you? What would you like people to have with them forever?
Laura, thank you for saying exactly what I was going to say. So I'm going to say a variation of that, which is if you're working to help someone that you love with grief, there is also a lot of support for that too. And it is something that you may have to look for. It's not as easily found as maybe a grief support group, which thankfully there are lots. Um, but I think it's absolutely 1,000,000% worth so that you can meet your loved one where they are.
That's great. So just one little tidbit that I got sort of accidentally, the day before my husband's memorial, I saw a posting on Facebook. Things you should never say to someone who just lost someone they love. And I thought, how perfect is that? So I posted it on my Facebook page because people, they really do mean well. They're really well intentioned. They're saying what their parents used to say or what they say on TV, but they don't know what to say. And so I just put that up on my Facebook page. And it was so interesting. The next day, people at the memorial said, yeah, thanks for posting that list because I used to say stuff on that list and now I know not to do that. So a friend of mine said, we should have printed that and passed it out to people at the door. I'm like, well, that's a little harsh, but wouldn't it be great if people actually said, a lot of people don't know this. So I just thought I would post this the day before the memorial so people have a better chance of saying lovely things and not hurtful things. And so that's kind of like, and here's what you're allowed to say. So it's kind of judgy, but nonetheless, letting people know, did you realize this is hurtful when you say this to people? They're relieved, they're not offended.
Mm.
Okay, so thank you once again. It's been such an honor to hang out with all of you and share your wonderful experience and your lovely parts. And we're going to end this video now, and then we're going to make a second video with some helpful tools. And so I'm hoping people who watch this one will also stick around and watch the second one. And thank you all so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Bye-bye.